What time is it? It's time for another Every Other Wednesday.
Welcome, everybody. Hey, we've got a question for you today. Put in the chat box as you're coming in your favorite or least favorite, and indicate which it is. Your favorite or least favorite stereotypical generation. I said that wrong, Phil. But
generational stereotype. How about
thank
that?
you, generational stereotype. And I speak for a living. So
with our special illustrious guest, Phil, you might have guessed that is the topic. We're talking about the generations in the workplace.
And we'll introduce Phil in a couple of minutes. Everybody have a good New Year?
Yeah.
I rearranged my office and ended up with a white wall behind me. I've got to do something about that. So
it's a little clean,
Yeah.
I took my boys, as you guys know, I took my boys on a cruise to the Bahamas. So that was kind of cool.
So again, in the chat box, your favorite or least favorite generational stereotype.
And as always, don't forget to change the chat box settings. I don't know if we fix that, but
no, we didn't.
Everybody
I just had to change mine. So.
Everyone, so that we can all see your wisdoms and your brilliant questions. Millennials are lazy. Sanjay, as a millennial, do you agree with that?
Wow.
I've certainly experienced that from
Why don't you have to be like 18 to be a millennial or something?
No, we'll talk about that too.
At one point,
millennials are lazy. I bet Phil's never heard that. Millennials are lazy, right?
Never come up before.
Old people are incompetent. People say that boomers don't want to change. I work with a diverse group and everyone is resistant to change unless it is explained properly. Love that. Boomers are just fine with change as long as they're not made to be scared of it.
Ooh, Ashley. I love that. Ashley, you need to come on the road with me. That's a brilliant. Might be screenshot that.
Yeah, I was going to say, and Phil, give Ashley credit the first time you use it, but then it's yours. So.
Oh, 100%. My good friend Ashley, and then it's like never heard of her. So
exactly. Well, let's get started. We've got an exciting show, a great guest. That's not you, Sanjay. I'm sorry. And Mike, what day is it?
It is, in case you've forgotten, January 10th, 2024.
And welcome to Every Other Wednesday. Why don't we introduce ourselves? Mike, you started, so why don't you go ahead?
Sure, my name's Michael Kerr, coming to you as I usually am from the beautiful, spectacular Canadian Rockies in Canmore, Alberta, where we are getting down to -30 in the next few days here, so it's a little bit cold. I speak on inspiring workplace cultures, inspiring leadership related to culture and humor in the workplace, and today just happens to be, because I know you want to know the theme days, it is official Oyster Rockefeller Day, Cut Your Energy Costs Day, which with -30-degree weather is a little tough thing to do, and Houseplant Appreciation Day. So show your houseplants some love today.
Hey guys, I really appreciate you.
There you go.
Just wanted to let them know.
They're behind you.
Sanjay.
I'm just quickly on the houseplant thing. Does that work for artificial plants as well? Are you supposed to show them appreciation?
That's this one.
They don't distinguish, so let's just embrace all houseplants.
Let's all just okay. My name is Sanjay Nath. I'm based just outside of Toronto, Ontario, Canada, North America, the world, Milky Way, etc., the universe. I am a speaker and author speaking on leadership and performance, best known for my trademark concept called the 10-80-10 principle. Mr. Tobe.
And I'm Jeff Tobe, coming to you from beautiful Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, where it's not -30 anything. It is snowing though, so that's new for us. I speak on customer experience, how to make the leap from customer service to customer experience. And I am all about coloring outside the lines. And I'm so excited to introduce our guest today. Phil, I didn't even know, Phil Gwoke, sorry. And I just wanted to say it on camera, Phil, that you messed things up for me. Because having a name that ends with E, as I do and you do, I don't pronounce the E, and yet everybody else does. So I get Toby all the time. But Phil is an amazing writer, market researcher, generational expert, and CEO of a company called Bridgeworks. They are dedicated to powering potential by cultivating meaningful human connections, leveraging over 2 decades of experience to reveal generational roadblocks that others may not see. Phil helps people and yeah, I'm cheating a little bit as I'm going here, but Phil helps people realize the value each generation brings to the workforce. I just don't want to miss anything. And now in the year 2024, he's excited to use this effective approach to help unite people across all lenses of diversity. Phil is a Generation Xer who grew up breakdancing and fixing cassette tapes and the eraser end of a #2 pencil. Oh, you just got Sanjay's attention because he grew up and see. I knew it. Phil, welcome to Every Other Wednesday.
Thank you so much. Great to be here on this first other Wednesday of 2024. And at this time of day, what I like to say is good after morning, because that seems to catch everybody from one coast to the other.
I like that.
And again, I couldn't have introduced myself better if I had written it and sent it to you myself. So
I am available to take on the road if that's, you know, something you want to talk about. So
yeah, you nailed it. You nailed it.
I don't know any other speakers who have a professional introducer. Now let me introduce my professional introducer.
Right.
And by the way, I'll carry bags. I'm good.
Yeah. Well, anyway, this is a topic of huge interest for us because obviously we are some different generations, and we also speak to many organizations that this is a huge concern, right, guys? And so I'm going to start the questioning with one that I've wondered. And first of all, why the interest? How did you get into this? Like, why generations? Yeah, you said you have at least a 15-year-old daughter, right?
Yeah, in my personal life, I'm experiencing these generational shifts on a daily basis. So I have the great privilege of having 4 children under my tutelage, 1 biological, 3 by marriage, and they are all technically under the umbrella of Gen Z. However, my oldest daughter, who's 26, married and gave me my first grandchild, December 19th, just 3 weeks ago yesterday.
Can you tell me how you do that? Because I'm trying to. I mean, having grandchildren.
Yeah. It's, you know, I wasn't there, but I am grateful that it happened. And then on the other end of the spectrum, my youngest daughter, who's 15, they're all technically the same generation, but very different experiences. So just watching that play out is interesting. Back in for 20 years, I worked with high school students. And starting in 1993, 1994. And I like to say back then I was really cool. I was funny. I listened to the same music, watched the same shows. They got my jokes. And as each decade passed, they stayed the same age. I kept getting older. And I realized if I don't do something to change up my style, I was no longer effective. And so that kind of got me introduced to the concept of adapting to generational shifts. And I just have a passion and personal interest for both history, which we'll talk a little bit about how history shapes these generational differences, and then bringing people together, uniting them, finding common ground that people can work together better with. So when I was introduced to generational theory and brought on board with Bridgeworks, it was just a natural fit 9 years ago. And now, as of this last year, was able to acquire the company myself. I love it so much. So that's kind of the synopsis of the journey.
That's awesome. Hey, Phil, share with the gang how your daughter has developed an interest that kind of spans the generations.
In the sense of
over his shoulder.
But we were talking about pre-talk. That's his.
Oh yeah, yes, that's a good point. So most of you, all of you can see that on Michael's screen there, there's a picture of what I thought was David Hasselhoff, but turns out to be Elvis Presley. And we were mentioning just kind of those generational shifts. Well, my youngest daughter, 15, has fallen in love with all things Elvis over the last 2 years. And so every time we get in the car, we only listen to Elvis. She knows all the Elvis trivia out there. There's a fun historical app where you can talk to people throughout history, the fusion of ChatGPT. And so you can ask people from history questions, and there's an Elvis selection on there. So she talks to Elvis as though he were one of her good friends. And so it is just interesting how these things circle back around.
It's cool because in my generation, when we wanted to talk to Elvis, we had to have a seance. So
yeah, you know. Now we just use technology before we have to use like a medium. So you know, it just rolls.
Very cool. So I actually didn't realize that your background was you started with in the high school market.
Yep.
So that was my background too. I've actually been into over 1,200 different youth events in schools and all that. And to your point, a joke I've used for many years is I say I'm bilingual. I speak adult and student. And exactly what you said, because it was right around the mid-90s for me as well, that I knew the music and now I have no clue, right?
Right.
And but my kids, you know, exactly what you were saying, like I don't know their music, but all of a sudden they're kind of singing along to 80s tunes. And I'm like, how do you know this song? Right. And the answer is Stranger Things. But anyways, yeah, it's a fascinating journey. And to see one of the questions I've been always asked was, do you find that things change from, you know, from school to school or geography wise? And I say they manifest themselves differently, but the core values are always there. So, for example, as a teenager, one of the core values is being different. It's kind of a rite of passage. In fact, there's a t-shirt I once said, it said, I want to be unique, just like all my friends. Right. And so you have that but how they choose, and there's also an element of rebellion, but how you choose to rebel in inner city downtown New York is very different than how you do it in rural Saskatchewan.
Sure.
But it's still the same principle, but manifesting itself differently.
Yeah. Yeah, it's an interesting point. Like it's when you study people, generational theory is based in sociology, large groups of people. And then there's psychology where you're understanding the individual. And each person is affected by both our psychology, our family, our culture, and most certainly our generational perspective, the time and history that we grew up in. So Sanjay, you make a great point that while that life stage of adolescent development from, say, you know, well, some psychologists say adolescence extends to 27 years old now, but, you know, the heartbeat of it being between 13 and, say, 19 or 21 years old, that is a time of self-discovery that all human beings go through, and it is a chance to kind of spread your wings, assert yourself beyond your parents' supervision, and yet at the same time, what a generational cohort shares in common are the tools of the rites of passage. So in other words, when we were growing up, most of us on this call, the main tool of that rite of passage would have been your car, the opportunity to go be free, go to the mall, see your friends. Now, many young people, they're delaying. There's not a big rush to get their license or to drive a car because that's not the main tool to connect with their friends. It's social media or various versions of technology. And I find it, you know, it's confusing when kids say, oh, I'll get my license when I get my license. And I'm like, what are you talking about? That's the way to be free. And they're like, no. Here's how I assert my freedom. So it's very, that's kind of what we study on how these things change from one era to the next, even though, like you said, teenagers are teenagers, but each era had a different expression of their freedom or rebellion.
So on that note,
wait, by the way, can I just say, my wife would say that adolescence actually lasts through your 60s. That's just from experience.
Your wife would definitely say
psychology. That's an individual.
You're right.
Your wife would definitely say that.
Look who she's married to. So
exactly.
So on that note, I know I'm going to mangle this question. How do you parse out, and I'm wondering if you could almost assign a percentage to this, the difference between the generational differences being influenced because of when they grew up, the time they grew up, versus just that natural changes we all go through in life. In other words, you know, when we were 25 years old, as boomers, Jeff and I certainly, we would have been similar to 25-year-olds in some aspects, but not all aspects, right? So how do you parse that out? How do you separate those two different phenomenon that we just naturally change as we age and have different behaviors and different attitudes about things?
Yeah. I think a part part of that question is, what are the greater influences on our evolution as an individual? And it's a question I'm fascinated by. I started off, and I believed in this hierarchy of things that I kind of felt shaped us. First and foremost, those aspects of our hardwired into your DNA, like your personality or your physical structure, then your family, then your culture, then your generations. Well, research is showing more and more that, generation might have the time that of your adolescent. Excuse me, everybody, fighting a little bit of a cold today here in Minnesota. The times in which you grew up, shaping your mind in that, structural time of adolescent brain development has a big influence on the tool that you had, the events and conditions going on in culture and society. And right now, I just finished a book called Biology of Belief, how your environment plays such a massive role in your just your belief system and almost physical body, genetic makeup, and so forth. So what has the biggest structure or the biggest impact? Hard to say exactly, but what I can tell you is, while all of us will move through the different stages of life, if we're fortunate, if we're blessed to go from childhood to young adulthood to adulthood to grandparent, or experienced professional,
old
seasoned person. Yeah, I try not to say old or young. They're kind of like the taboo words in my business. So a seasoned individual. Hopefully we'll all move through all those stages, and as we do, most certainly our perspective shifts, and that's always been the case. But what is interesting is what the generations move through them differently. So there's a great book out there by Strauss and Howe called The Fourth Turning, where it literally maps out each generations, the 4 generations that are predominant in any society, and how they'll move through those stages differently than others because of the unique environments that they shape them when they were kids. So whereas let's say one generation who grew up in a very scary, tumultuous time as children, they mature through life a little bit more risk averse. And another generation that grew up in a very promising time where there's a lot of economic growth and a lot of confidence, they grew up with more hubris and confidence as they mature through those stages. And there's subtle nuances in.
So yeah. You're mentioning being seasoned. I want to point out that Mike and Jeff are so seasoned they're marinated. What you're saying, because it's such a complex picture. I'm sure you guys have heard people talk about birth order, and does birth order play a personality? And it's similar, but I think that I actually don't believe in a birth order. I believe it actually has to do with parenting style. So what happens is the first kid is born, and everything they do, parents hover over them like, oh my goodness, Johnny is walking. Oh my goodness, Johnny is talking. Oh my goodness, Johnny is clapping. And they love attention because they that's what they learn. And then by the time the second one is born, they're still going, oh my goodness, Johnny is reading. Oh my goodness, Johnny has a girlfriend. And the second one kind of gets ignored, and they're like, all right, whatever. So they have that more temperament. So I think that the personalities line up with the birth order, but it's not because of birth order, but it's because of these other external factors that are going on specifically around this parenting. And that's where it becomes so difficult because, like you said, if someone grows up in the depression, there are 2 ways of looking at it. One is they have that scarcity mentality, and they don't want to do that, or they do the opposite and go, because I grew up in scarcity, I want to be abundant and I want to give away and I want to waste. And it's right. Hard to say which path they go. The Anakin Skywalker syndrome.
Hey, I love a great Star Wars reference. So anytime you can drop that in the conversation,
hardcore Gen Xers, dude.
Yeah, you become a good friend there. But see, I agree with you to the point that you're exactly right. Birth order is not a thing because of the sequence, but because of the different environment that child was in as a result of a unique family dynamic. So and again, I raised an only child until I married my wife, my second wife here. And I learned a lot about birth order, and like her oldest son will say, he's the only one of the three that have baby books where it's just him. All the other baby books, he's in the picture. So it changed the environment in which those young people grew up. So no, it's not the fact that they were born second or third, but the environment that was unique. And the reason I want to make that point strongly is that's the truth of generations. So earlier, the question we opened up with, what's your favorite or worst stereotype about generations? And we heard that millennials are lazy, old people are incompetent, boomers are unwilling to change, and so forth. But many times, and this team here, you guys brought to my attention the Jodie Foster quote that recently came out last week, that Gen Z is annoying. If she would have been born at this same time, growing up in this environment, she would exhibit the same characteristics that they are. And this is where I try to bring people together. They're not different than you. They've just had a different experience than you. And the key to working together, understanding or communicating is just pause for a moment of curiosity and lean in. All right, how was their world different than mine? My father grew up in Uganda in East Africa. He didn't have a pair of shoes until he was 12 years old. He didn't have running water, no electricity. That was the environment he grew up in. Very different than the one that I grew up in. So it fostered a different mindset. And to your point, growing up in the Depression, how that could either create a lack mindset or I'm going to overcome this mindset. Thankfully, in my father's case, he decided he was going to go to college and overcome extreme poverty to kind of change his world. And people can choose to respond to their environment how they want to, but certainly his environment gave him a very different worldview than my environment.
So I'm going to switch gears only because we are every other Wednesday is about all things corporate culture.
Yeah, bring it.
And I'm curious to know if there are different workplace culture expectations for each generation, or how you view that.
Yeah, that's a big one. Culture is so key. And if it without looking at the bigger picture, most certainly when millennials came into the workforce, they really emphasized the importance of a healthy culture in their work environment. And we can mistakenly believe that culture only matters to them. It matters to all of us. But what was different was the environment that shaped boomers fostered a mindset that, again, my dad is like right at the beginning of the boomer cycle. He grew up in another country, but still it was that, overcome the odds, become the best, achieve greatness, and that competitive edge was the culture in the workplace in the, 60s and 70s and 80s. And the saying, my father-in-law, he's very proud to say, when the company that he worked for years will say, we weren't there to make friends, we were there to make money, right? That was the culture. How do you be the best? Mm-hmm. Gen Xers came into the workplace and we saw just the total drive nature that boomers brought to the workplace and said, I don't know that I'm willing to do that, but I will work hard so I can play hard, bust my tail 8 hours a day so I can move on to the other parts of our lives, because we saw what it costs baby boomers in their health, the divorce rates of baby boomers, and we wanted, something different. So we introduced work-life balance. Then millennials came in and they said, you know what? I'm just as smart in a hoodie as I am in a suit. And they brought kind of a casual, authentic nature to the workplace and really introduce work-life integration. Can we have fun at work while doing, meaningful, getting things done? And now you see this shift called to work-life harmony, where it should bring balance to my life. That's really important to Gen Z, especially in a post-pandemic world where everything has been disrupted and we're rethinking what it takes to be productive. So each generation tends to bring a new mindset. And what's interesting is the generation that is in their young adult stage of life tends to have the biggest impact on society. So when boomers enter the workforce and they were young adults, they influenced, if you think of the 60s and 70s, they were completely transformed by the baby boomer generation, which takes me back to the comment I love what Ashley, my new best friend, said earlier, the idea that boomers aren't willing to change. That's a generation that changed every stage of life. They're very willing to change, especially if you know what their values are to create that change. So great job. So each generation, so they had a huge impact on society. Xers then had the next impact, and now we're seeing Gen Z in a post-pandemic world coming in and saying this is what's important to us, and people my age and older are saying, yeah, I kind of want that harmony too. I want a little bit of not be it's beyond balance. It's just like it should energize me.
Does size matter? What I mean by that is,
I love that question. I know what you mean. Bring it.
Okay, so if you look at the boomers, they were by numbers a huge group, and there's a lot of research, written stuff that's been said. For example, the boomers created so many industries. So when the boomers were teenagers, this is when the likes of McDonald's and Burger King and these social hangout places exploded. Then you hit the 80s and the gyms. All of a sudden, every corner had a gym because they were getting old, going, oh my goodness, my back hurts. I gotta work out. And now in terms of retirement homes, and so because of the size, they've made a seismic shift and changed businesses literally as they've aged.
Oh, so intuitive. Yeah, brilliant question. That's absolutely true.
Don't tell him that, please, Phil.
Well,
Are we recording? I didn't even hear a question in there. There was no question in there. He was just rambling.
Go ahead.
Okay, truth be told, Bill just texted me
the size. Does the size matter? Yes, that was your question.
Yeah, boomers, largest generation in American history, and interestingly enough, Gen Xers, smallest generation in American recent history. I mean, previously, of course, there were smaller generations, but and I just want to throw a little nugget in there. The reason for that was twofold. One, two parents going to work from in that era was a big change. So the idea to have these bigger families shifted, and then birth control. People had the option too. So there's this new medical technology which gave families the opportunity to kind of plan their world out a little bit differently. For the most part, generational parenting changes or shifts every other generation. So baby boomers, for the most part, are the parents of millennials. Gen Xers are the parents of Gen Z. So millennials were a larger generation because there just were so many more boomers, and then you were seeing Gen Z, a smaller generation as well. So yeah, that large generation had a huge impact on society. What we're now seeing also, and this is a big here in the United States, probably not as much as I guess I don't know from Canada as well, but immigration is also shifting because there's been such a huge influx of people the age of, say, millennials and Gen Z coming into the country. That's when you talk about size mattering. Their perspective, much like my father's, is probably going to have a huge impact on the culture of the day.
Back to that culture point. Are you seeing? I've certainly read a lot where it's suggested that the younger generations, and I'll just use that generalization, want a greater sense of meaning out of their work as well, greater sense of purpose. I believe that's important to everybody, regardless of the age, and it can have a huge impact. But there seems to be a lot of surveys that suggest it's that much more important to the younger generations, and they're willing to switch jobs to a workplace or a job or a culture that gives them a greater sense of purpose. Is that what you're finding?
So I'm glad that you pointed out that every generation, people need to feel meaning in their work. I think I saw that you had Joe Mull on as one of your guests. I had the privilege of speaking at an event, and he spoke right before me, and I immediately got his book. Actually, I got his book right away because he gave it to me, but I was going to get it anyway because I just really love
Better Bosses. Better Bosses, is that the one?
Yeah, no, employability.
We just had him on the show, and he lives 10 minutes from me. So
is that right?
Yeah.
No. Great guy. Don't know him, but I saw him and love his stuff. And but it's important. People need to have meaning in their work. What's different from one generation to the next is how you would define meaning. So again, Xers might say a meaningful company. is the best at what we do. We're number one in the world. And so there's meaning there. And it kind of, redefines itself down the way. Here's what we're starting to see. An interesting shift between millennials and Gen Z. Most certainly, millennials, that was a big thing. Like, I'm going to pursue my passions. That generation were rocked as teenagers because of September 11th, 2001, just the whole world, right? It just changed the dynamic of the conversation. And parents were sitting down with their kids and saying, hey, if you're going to commit to a job, you can do something, it should matter. It should be meaningful. That was the discussion. So millennials in mass, many of them went off to college to pursue their passions, only to graduate with massive debt and find themselves working at Starbucks, right? And hoping that there was healthcare benefits in the process. Hold on, excuse me. As a result, Gen Z, who were young through the recession of 2008 and some of those economic instability moments, watched their parents struggle to keep their homes, struggle to keep their jobs. And then our research, I think we have a study out that says 88% of Gen Z, when surveyed, chose job opportunity, use job opportunity to select the college major that they were going to choose, because they wanted an opportunity that would make sure it provided stability for them, having grown up in a very unstable world. So everyone wants meaning, but for millennials, it might be the more the classic definition of meaning, like we're changing the world. Whereas Gen Z, there's good meaning in a job that also provides stability for myself and provides sustainability in the world. Is there something that our company is involved in that is making sure everyone has security in their life? So yes, meaning's important. The definition changes often from one generation to the next. And again, I'll point out for the three of you and for the audience, generational research, we're studying sociology, large groups of people. Are there individuals who are millennials and want a job because it pays a ton of money? Absolutely. Are there, baby boomers who are like, I don't care, we don't need to be number one, I just want to, feed the starving people of the earth? Absolutely. But generationally, large groups, that's what we tend to see.
So it's a problem.
Let me play, sorry.
Go ahead, Joe.
Let me play devil's advocate for a minute, if you don't mind. Are you familiar with the work of Dr. Jessica Kriegel?
I am not. Please.
She wrote a book that is called, the title is Unfairly Labeled. And there's a subtitle, something about how your workplace can benefit from ditching stereotypes. And her whole premise was that 99% of the stereotypes we have of generations are completely false. Also through research, that the data shows that all those stereotypes, and she couches it that all the stereotypes and all the labeling that we do is really counterintuitive to D&I, to diversity and inclusion. If we're talking about inclusion and diversity, why are we labeling certain groups? And I'm curious what your thoughts are on that, because that's, to me, is kind of the other end of the spectrum.
Yeah, I love the thought. Here's how I would address it, both from a personal standpoint and then from a strategic standpoint in terms of how we help organizations. Personally, when I was first introduced to generational theory, my reaction was, do not put me in a box. I am not a Gen Xer. I am Phil Gwoke, with an E pronounced at the end of my name, right? I am my own person. Don't, label me. And then I started reading about the experiences of Gen Xers and the mindset of Gen Xers, and I was like, hey, that sounds so much like me. Then I started doing interviews, and I've interviewed thousands, I would say, over the course of these last decade of people. And what we'll do typically when we do a presentation for an organization or a workshop or whatever, our advanced research is I'll interview people from different ages within their organization, different stages in their career, and I'll ask them all the same question. And it was just remarkable to me how I just asked the same question the same way. What do you love about your job? What's the most challenging parts about your job? What are some things in a leader that you really respect, or a mentor? And what do you hope to get out of a session like this? And invariably, people the same age respond the same ways across the industry. So it's like there's something to this. Now, to I forget her name, the person you referenced,
Dr. Kriegel, I think. Yeah.
Dr. Kriegel, yeah. To her point, here's where I would say I don't. This is where don't look at a person and say, oh, wow, they've got, certain physical features that tell me that they're this generation, therefore I'm going to treat them this way. That's not our point at all. Our point is when you encounter something that causes you to label someone, saying things like, what's wrong with kids these days, or whatever, that the Jodie Foster reference earlier, Gen Z is so annoying. When your mind begins to put that person in a box, all of our goal, our mission as an organization is to help people take the lid off the box and look and see what's inside. What experiences has that person had that's different from yours, that's causing them to show up and communicate in a way that's different from you, that would help you understand where that's coming from? Because they're not annoying. They've just had a different set of experiences. They're not lazy. They just grew up in an environment with tools that you and I didn't have. There's a study out there by Robert Kelly, professor at Carnegie Mellon University. And in the research, it shows that when baby boomers started their career, in order to be successful, they had to remember 75% of what they learned in their training once they got to the job. Because if someone asked them a question, they've got to be ready to answer it. And that's how they excelled in their career. In contrast, young people today starting their careers, in order for them to be successful, they only have to remember 10% of what they've learned in school. Because if they have a question, they can go to this device right here that did not exist in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. That is a very undeniable, distinct generational experiential difference that we can't, you can't say, oh, no, that's not true. But what happens is the people that grew up remembering 75% of what they learned look down on the people who are always Googling the questions, when someone asks them a question. They're not as smart as we are. No, they're every bit as smart as you are. They just didn't grow up exercising that part of their brain in the same way you did. Once you understand that, now you can go, oh, okay, they had a different experience. Let me equip them. Let me not put them down. So that's our goal. Don't put them in the box. Find out what's going on inside that box as to why they showed up differently.
So Phil, speaking of putting them in a box, what do you tell the seasoned managers, leaders who do pull out the number one generational cliche probably that's out there is, oh my God, we can't find any good workers. Young people are so lazy. They don't want to work. Mm-hmm. They don't show up. They show up late. They have all these demands. What is your response to that when you hear that?
Well, I'm going to blame Jeff for where my mind is going with this answer, because you brought DE&I up early. I hear the same thing from law firms who say, well, we want to hire African-American attorneys. We just can't find any, good ones out there. Essentially, you're not looking good enough. You're going back to the same pools that you're familiar with. You're using the same recruitment techniques that would have appealed to you. You're using the same leadership styles. You have the same standards that you would have wanted. And just with some small, subtle changes, you can completely transform the game. And it's really found in, again, I always say, never compromise productivity or outcomes of your company, your organization. You exist because you provide a valuable good or service in society. I just spoke at a healthcare hospital association earlier this week. And I would never say, okay, you have to be so nice to people and don't expect too much of them. When it comes to my healthcare, I want my nursing staff, my physicians to bring their absolute A game. I don't want to compromise excellence or quality. So I never ask people to compromise that, but I'm saying with a few culture, thanks to the Culture Club shifts, you can create an environment that does, it connects with the values of a person who's had a different set of experiences than you have in a way that fosters that type of excellence that you want. And those different experiences can be the result of their generational differences, their cultural differences, their faith difference, their, you know, right on down a birth order difference, right? I mean, just understanding people is the key, the name of the game.
So I'm the math guy in the group. I'm very nerdy that way. And so this really is a game of probability. So I appreciate that too, and I very much buy into it. That no, whenever we categorize a group, we put people in a box. Of course, there are exceptions, and to think that everyone fits in that box is ignorant. Yeah. So, but like you said, there's a commonality. So I know that the average teenager, if I want to motivate them, it's food and money. Now, there are some teenagers that don't care about food and money, but it doesn't mean everyone fits there. So really what we're doing is like I said, is a game of probability. If I meet a lion, I'm not going to try to sit down and discover if it's a hungry lion or not. I want to get the heck out of there. And so there are certain strategies that just have a higher probability of success. So bringing it back pragmatically, I'm in a workplace and I have multiple generations working. How do I appease the most? How do
I love that question. I know we're coming up on our time here, but did you just randomly throw out food and money? Because there's a new study out about teenagers and food and money that I want to touch on.
No, he owns teenagers. That's what
he owns them.
Well, I'm gonna give
they own me, but whatever.
Amen, brother. I'm gonna give a parenting tip, but first let me answer that question, and then come back to the thought that's on my mind. The biggest question, the most challenging thing as a leader is to appeal to a diverse workforce. In this case, a multi-generational workforce. How do I craft one message? How do I host a meeting that appeals to everyone? And my answer is simple: you really can't. But what you can do, assuming that your workforce is with you over the course of a year or hopefully multiple years, you can balance your email, your messaging, the meeting format of the meeting to adapt, understanding those values. So this meeting, maybe I'm going to lean into that millennial, persona, because I understand, for them, by and large, or at least the ones in my organization, they want to feel like there's a connectivity. There's kind of like a personality, a heartbeat to the organization. The next meeting, it's going to be to the point. It's going to be shorter than normal because my Gen Xers are going to love that. The next meeting is going to be super strategic. We're going to show how we're going to conquer the world. My boomers are going to be thrilled. The next meeting, we're just going to pause and ask how everyone's doing and really focus on mental health and personal well-being, because Gen Z needs to know that this is a place that genuinely cares about them, right? So you got to look at it holistically and know you're never going to get everyone all at one time, but over the course of time, and again, this is things you do as a parent. And kids are different in your home. And sometimes you're going to have game night in, and other times you're going to go out to the event, and one kid's going to hate one and one kid's going to hate the other, but over the course they're going to be like, mom and dad really care about me, right? So let me just come back, land on a generational thought here. Our research shows, as a result of growing up in a global pandemic, amidst financial crisis, environmental concern, Gen Z is risk averse, right? Not all Gen Z, some are completely throw caution to the wind, but many are not wanting to put themselves or others at risk. So I bring this up because, interestingly enough, the study just came out of, as a parent, if you're trying to motivate your student to do well on a test, what is more inspiring to them? To say, hey, if you get an A on this test, I'll give you $100. Or if you get an A on this test, I'm going to take you out to lunch. And the research showed that students are doing better when they say, hey, if you get an A on this test, I'm going to take you out to lunch, because they want that $100 so bad. They put a lot of pressure on themselves to get that $100. And then invariably they don't do as well because they're stressed out with the pressure of losing the $100. But lunch is kind of a low stakes thing. Yeah, I'd like it. And they tend to do better with that kind of motivation. Whereas with baby boomers, it might have been the exact opposite, right? So understanding the environment of the psyche that was shaped as a result of their experience, and knowing how to place the same carrots, but at different time, different tempos, different pressure, is going to make all the difference in leading a multi-generational workforce.
So
that's awesome.
So thank you. We make our promise that we will be out of here on time. There's so much more we could talk about. Michael, I know I just cut you off, and I'm going to hear about that later. But I'm going to put you on the spot, Phil, because this has been so fascinating. I've been watching the comments in the, we didn't refer to the comments in the chat box at all because we were just so enthralled. I'm going to put you on the spot. I've never done this with a guest, but we would really love to have you back if you would agree to come back sometime. That's a yes or no. So.
Yeah, I mean, if you just double the price.
Yeah, okay, it's done.
Two times zero is zero. I'm back. Let's do this. Let's go.
We may increase the number of us if Richard's available too. So I just want to thank you. I think that, like I said, there's so much more we could go into, especially with culture and generations. And your expertise is something that I'm just looking that our listeners and our attendees are enthralled with. So thank you. Thank you so much for being here. I apologize to everybody. We didn't get to your comments this time. We will next time. And next time is on January 24th, right, guys? 2 weeks from now. Apparently, we have a guest. Richard did not tell us who it was, so it's a surprise guest. But Phil Gwoke, I will never forget how to say the last name, and you can call me Jeff Toby. That's okay. Thank you again for being with us. And I, for one, can't wait till you come back. Guys?
Thank you. Yeah, absolutely. Ditto to that. Thank you, folks, for joining us. Happy New Year to everyone. Nice to see everyone back. And if you found value, tell your friends. We want a bazillion people on next time.
Yeah, thank you, Phil. That was fabulous, fascinating stuff. So much we didn't get to, so I look forward to the sequel. And thank you, as always, for the folks who chimed in and joined us. And happy 2024. We will see you in 2 weeks.
We'll see you every other Wednesday. Bye, everyone.
Thanks, folks.
Bye,